I have my Durmstrang shirt on. I think I've worn this the most. It's just, I never think about what I put on in the morning. I don't care.
Yeah, me either. So some people think I don't do laundry because my closet is just full of the same 3 or 4 things. Like I have
That's what I
five,
do.
yeah, I have like 5 pairs of black scrubs and 20 gray t-shirts, and I wear this hoodie. I mean,
Yeah. That's
my
right.
boxers, on the other hand, are always very colorful. Me undies.
Awesome.
Oh, oh, I'm serious. I've got like right now I'm wearing Christmas plaid, and I have some pink, like neon pink ones with hedgehogs all over them.
Oh,
The
awesome.
Kung Fu raccoons. I mean, I'm a black and gray tattoo artist, but I always like to put a splash of color in my tattoos. The same is true of my wardrobe. Hey everyone, what's up? Josh here, and today I'm joined, as always, by the amazing one and only Chris Bevan. And yeah, the one and only. Today, Chris, I believe, is probably going to be the primary speaker on this particular topic because it's something very near and dear to his heart as an artist, and it's something that I'm very curious about myself. So today's topic, we're going off our regular beaten path of motivation and into, I mean, it's still a shortened version of the word, I suppose, but motive as an artist. So, Chris.
Yeah, I haven't really looked into the etymology of motivation, but when you look at motive, it's like, that has to be part of the word. I should have looked into the etymology of it. But anyway, motive. Just to give you some backstory on this, years ago, I read The Art Spirit by Robert Henry and didn't really understand it. I knew it was kind of out there, good book, intellectual, this kind of thing, but it took years after that, basically recently. I read it again and actually understood it. And I would suggest on Audible, they have or an audio book, wherever you get your audiobooks from, they have the 50th anniversary of it. It's read by, I can't remember who it's read by, but it's really good on audiobook. Probably a little bit easier to understand on audiobook, really, from the way the guy reads it. So that's where this had begun for me. And there was a huge shift in my work from all technical into what's most important in my mind with when you create your artwork and having that deep, connection with it. And we'll define, as I go through here, we'll define exactly what motive is. But first, let's look at what I had before and what most artists kind of come up with, and that is skill for skill's sake or art for art's sake. What does that mean exactly? And this is when you as an artist, you're completely focused on technique. And this is difficult to get away from because this is where you start. Usually, especially if you're a representational artist. Many artists start out because when I was in university learning, many artists start out intellectually and they don't learn the skill. And even that has some problems to it also, because when you want to actually include a figure in your work and you can't really draw a figure, and it could be problematic, right? But for most artists like myself and Josh, we start with technique. We start with, how to draw this, how to draw that, how to render a figure, what is form, what's gesture, what's structure, what's value, what's color, what's hue. You could go on forever about the technical concerns. You can spend your entire life getting so technically advanced that you're working with a single hair brush on this huge canvas and getting something painted so exact like it is in life that it's photorealistic. And that is skill for skill's sake. I don't like photorealism. It's amazing. I mean, holy crap, someone that could spend that much time and get a photorealistic object in paint or in drawing or whatever is pretty amazing. But in my understanding, just take a picture, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's faster.
exactly. It's a great achievement, but it doesn't really say much beyond what you're seeing. So, and that's what is, basically a lifeless copy And in The Art Spirit by Robert Henry, he talks about copies all the time. But this is how we learn, okay? And I'm gonna constantly go back and forth, okay? Because it's not one or the other. It's a balance between the two, okay? It's a balance between technical and emotional. Why you're doing the work and how you're doing the work. And it's very similar to how Steve Houston talks about and Nicolaides in The Natural Way to Draw, where it's a constant kind of battle or back and forth between structure and gesture, when you're drawing the figure. Got to keep both in,
Yeah.
balance it back and forth. But staying away from that just lifeless copying. And I love this quote by Robert Henry. And he's speaking in terms of a representational artist in his time, which is, late 1800s, when they're drawing figures, right, or painting from the figure. He says the model is not to be copied, but to be realized. The painting is the result of the effect of the model on the artist. It is not the model we need, but the vision. The vision is what's important in your artwork. So it's great to walk out of the life drawing studio and have a drawing that looks perfect like the model that you were drawing. But it goes well beyond that if you walked out of that same studio and you described the emotion that you were feeling or that you felt that the model was feeling when you walked out of that studio in flat, two-dimensional, charcoal, whatever. That's an achievement. That's a huge achievement.
I really like that you did point out that it was a balance. So it's not that an artist needs to focus exclusively on the emotion or the why, or exclusively on the technique or the how. So both are important. And I I will admit myself that as I've been learning and training, I do focus mostly on technique. I'm very much a technician whenever it comes to creating art. And that's why I'm really excited about this conversation and the conversation we had on Tuesday, just to get a much deeper understanding of how the emotion goes. Well, I guess when the emotion goes into the art and the results you get from it, it's completely different than the lifeless copies.
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do you get the emotion in your artwork? And that's something I struggle with for forever. It's like, no, I'm just really trying to get this orange to look like a freaking orange in oil paint. Yeah, that's hard enough. At some point, you get beyond the technical. You get enough technical so that you can begin to focus on this, right? And even Robert Henry, in his book, he says in many places, he's like, why wait, right? Why wait until you have technical proficiency before you can actually enjoy or express or communicate? And that's one thing we'll get into later. But that's actually a really good question. And because there's a couple sources through here, and I mentioned before, one of the biggest sources is you have to learn some kind of technical proficiency, right? And as
Well,
artists, go ahead.
I think that's a really interesting talking point. We feel like we have to learn the technical before we get into the emotional.
Yes, exactly.
You were just talking about Robert Henry and how he points out why wait. So he might be challenging that assumption there. Well, he is challenging that assumption there. It's like, can you learn both in tandem?
Yeah, I think you can, definitely. You
I
can
just
keep the
didn't.
emotion because and that's the most important thing. It's no different than when you're trying to draw a figure in correct proportion yet keep the gesture, right? That
Yeah.
unifying line that goes through it. It's not, keeping it from looking stiff. This is the same with a painting of a landscape. Why did you paint that landscape or begin painting that landscape in the beginning? Let's keep that motive throughout it, but we'll get more into that. But the source of this is the beginning, where you feel like, in order for me to become an artist, I have to know the technical ideas of an artist and then move from there. That turns into a problem when you don't go beyond it. When your whole
Mm,
career as an artist is technical, 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 right? There's one part in Robert Henry's book where he says he returns back to the Art Students League, right? Like 13 years later or something. And there's still people there that were there that are still, quote unquote, learning when he was there. And he said they have such technical proficiency with the figure that they could draw better than any master available, but they have done really nothing with their art because they still feel, oh, it needs to get better, better, better. They've never said anything with it. It's kind of well, it's not a complete waste, but it's a bit of a waste, right? You know,
Yeah.
art is here for communication. Another source that Josh, you pointed out, I think is a really good way of perceiving how external influences, the public, influence us as an artist to keep us away from our emotional connection with the work and why we're doing it in the first place. You know, culture influences the public's perception of technical skill.
Yeah.
When you show to the broad public your work, most are not going to have some kind of psychological or deep understanding of, you know, even the history of art and where you fit within it. And that's totally fine. What they're going to look at is amazing. It looks just like the person you drew. That Yoda looks just like Yoda. That whatever you're drawing, that still life looks just like an orange and that kind of stuff. And that's praised, and it's constant praise, especially when you're young. Wow, it looks just like a picture. You're so good. You're so talented, quote unquote, talented, right? You know, this goes back with like habit creation and everything like that, where you're constantly reinforced to get technically better, technically better, technically better, because you're listening constantly to external sources. At some point, we have to understand that those external sources are important, but not the full reason why you're doing this as an artist, and move beyond just the technical skill.
Yeah, another source of cultural influence, I think, that I didn't really consider before now, but it's fear. Just the fear of pouring your emotion into something that may not be received well by the public. So if you have something to say and it's worth saying, someone will disagree with it. And beyond that, since the public is mostly concerned with technical application, what happens if they focus exclusively on the technical application and ignore your message? So it's another big source of cultural influence, the fear of putting yourself out there publicly.
That is so true. The fear of it, the fear of, wow, I'm going to really open myself up with this piece of work because it's something deep within my heart. So, or some big travesty that's going on in politics or the world. And I want to tell people that it's wrong. I want to make a stand. As soon as you make that stand, you're going to have people that don't like it. You know, you're opening yourself up. And this is the difference between amateur and professional. Is a person that says, no, this is the reason why I'm doing art, and I'm busting through that fear. I'm breaking beyond it, and I'm becoming a pro, and I'm true to my feelings, to the way I feel, and this is what makes me get up in the morning and live. You know, Stephen Pressfield's all about, you know, amateur to pro and getting over fear and resistance. You know, we've already talked about that. But you're right. That's one of the huge sources that keep people into the safety of technical and not getting deep into the emotional, you know, the communication part. How can you, as an artist that's listening to this, bring more of yourself into your work and communicate more than just visually? We want to communicate more than that. And the very first thing is understanding your motive, right? Not just in a broad sense of why am I an artist, but why am I doing this painting? You're going to be spending a lot of time on this painting. You're going to be spending a lot of time on this drawing or whatever you do. Have some time for the motive. Have some time for the idea behind it, and keep that just like a gestural line, that flow through the figure. Keep your motive through the entire piece. You know, you may spend weeks, months, or years on the same painting or drawing, but why you started it and the emotion behind it and why you wanted to communicate needs to stay with that. So constant refresh of your motive. I usually write down, okay, I want to try and communicate this in some way, and then you check in with it, you know, every week or so.
what I'm curious about though is how you reach your motive for your work. So how do you decide what you want to say? How do you articulate that before you start working on a fresh piece of art? Or how do you arrive at the messaging, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, that's a really good question because, and the question is giving me an understanding that a person that is into this and asking the question, maybe you're asking the question for your own work, Josh, or someone else is asking the question, is they're still putting the technical first. They're still putting the project first. And that's mostly the concern is a lot of times, for you, Josh, a tattoo will come in and, hey, I want to do this. And then you have to kind of feel, how can I get the emotion into it?
Well, so with tattooing, the motive is usually handed to me.
Yeah.
And that's, I'll admit that that is convenient. I mean, I always try to make sure that there is a message behind the tattoo. I try to figure out why my client wants this tattoo. And from that point, I create a piece of art for that client that hopefully communicates everything they want it to communicate in an effective way. So that's convenient for me as a tattoo artist. It's like, oh, this is representing your loss. What do you remember about your grandfather?
Mm-hmm.
What were some of his hobbies? What are your favorite pastimes? And then I can take those ideas and translate them. So my job at that point is to be a translator for my client to give them something specific for them.
Right.
Whenever it's something independent, especially since I love figure drawing, it's just one of my favorite passions. Whenever I'm drawing a figure, I used to focus, like you said, on the technical side. And I feel like I'm still preoccupied there quite a bit. But whenever I do a gesture, I always find, this is the curve that I find most aesthetically appealing. And I'm going to emphasize that.
Right.
But beyond the beginning of the gesture, once I start rendering, I feel like I completely lose what I started with. And even in my gesture drawing, I just recently decided to loosen up and, just go for it. What am I feeling? What am I feeling? What am I feeling? But even now, you saw with the 2-minute poses that I was showing you earlier, if I start focusing on structure, I think too early, then I lose the gesture. On the other hand, if I can spend more time on the gesture and move into a 5-minute pose, I think that's why that 5-minute pose felt better to me, is because I wasn't rushing through the gesture. Like I did the gesture quickly
Yeah.
and then moved into the 5-minute pose, but I had more time with the gesture there. And that's a realization that just now hit me. I don't think it was because I was frustrated with the 2 minutes that was bugging me so much. It was just I had more time for the gesture. Holy crap.
Yeah. There's so many ways that we can enter into a piece, right? If you're in front of a figure in a life drawing class, right, or a life drawing setup, it's not usually not a class. We always call it a class, but you just show up and you draw the figure because you want to draw the figure. In that instance, you look at the figure and you only have a choice of the figure that they have in front of you and how they're posing. And sometimes it's just ridiculously boring, right? And you have to kind of insert yourself within this. What emotional part of this can I find within this figure? And maybe it's not in the whole of the figure. Maybe, wow, this person looks really sad or really bored or uncomfortable or whatever. That's kind of a whole thing. How do you draw uncomfortable? How do you draw sad? What lines in charcoal or pencil would you use for that? That's like a whole concern. Then it could be brought into on that figure. I love the way that this light kind of shines, from a particular angle, this chiaroscuro I have, and it reminds me of some religious text or some religious practice. How do you communicate that in a piece, right? So in this idea, it's the focus is, well, in this scenario, right, the focus isn't on, completely on perspective, proportion, that's going to play, that's part of it. You still have to get that involved. But the beginning of it starts with some kind of emotion, right? In other instances, here's another scenario. You're working, you're doing something, you're going about your day, you're laughing with friends, you're enjoying life like you should, and this is where emotional content comes in. Maybe it's something extreme, like a loss in the family, someone close to you, this kind of thing. Or maybe it's just a beautiful landscape, or the way the wind goes through a certain tree, or how much you love your cat, or something like that. And right away you get a vision in your head of this kind of emotional response. Wow, how can I communicate that? How can I communicate this emotion? And then you don't have a subject. All you have is your memory. All you have is your thoughts and feelings. And then you start with, oh, well, it'd be best be done on canvas, in oil paint, with these certain colors, values, this kind of thing. Or it would be best done in a drawing or whatever.
Yeah.
Another scenario, which this is really what it really kind of changed my life and my art life, really. My wife came to me with this idea of a book, right? Fandom fitness. And we wanted to connect individuals inside of fandoms with fitness and change their lives so that they would be more motivated to exercise and be healthy, from a book that had a connection, these awesome images of, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever, and workouts associated with it. So we tried some things and I decided to do some drawings. And the first few drawings were, I'm just rendering Wonder Woman. I'm just rendering Superman and making it, trying to look like Wonder Woman and Superman. And you can look at this on my website. Eventually I get to Spock, and that was the big change. Spock was the big change because I was reading The Art Spirit by Robert Henry. I got the book off the shelf so I could show you. Love this book. And I started looking into not just what Spock is when you look at a picture of him, but who the character is. He's a technical, logical, straight line, straight edge kind of person. And Spock was pretty easy. I was like, well, yeah, it's pretty easy. And then how do you communicate technical, logical, to the T, sticks with everything in charcoal on white piece of paper? Well, you use straight lines. You separate everything delineately. It's almost like a technical rendering, and everything's hard-edged. And that's what I did. And I felt so much more connected with the communication of that work that it went well beyond any other drawing before. And every single drawing, almost every single drawing after that, there was okay, I'm doing this piece that's been assigned to me, whatever character. Who is that character, right? How can I express that in some way? And then trying to keep that motive. Some of them I get back to I just feel like drawing something, and making it look like them. But that's the solution. And it comes in different aspects. And always there's going to be the technical concerns along with the emotional, the communicative concerns, the motive versus the technician, the emotion versus the technician, this kind of thing. It's always going to be a balance. Some of the things that you can do, and if you really want to include more of this in your artwork, and you're an artist, I would say get The Natural Way to Draw by Nicolaides, and then do all the exercises. But it gets you to start with blind contours. So you're thinking more about the feeling of something, and feeling as in
reach out and touch.
Yeah, tactile feeling versus emotional feeling. You get into gestures, then you get into working from memory, and I think that's one of the most influential things I've ever done is working from memory every single day. He's got this amazing practice where you think about the day that you had before. You would think about a scenario that had where you were viewing someone or yourself or whatever, and you draw that from memory. No photo, no nothing, just a composition of characters, whatever you're doing, Not only do you figure out everything that you really don't know about the figure, but you focus really on, well, how can I depict, this kid that I saw that looked kind of sad and dejected from his friends or her friends on the playground, this kind of thing. So you get a little bit deeper into the motive behind everything. So you can't have any technical because you haven't done memory practice. So it's going to be all emotional at that point, all motive.
I'm excited to get to that point in the book. Still working through schedule 2 right now.
Yeah,
Making progress though.
it's one of those things where it's a long book, and I put it down. I remember years ago I looked at this book, right? And most people do this. I mean, you look at reviews online, they look at the art inside of it, and they go, "Man, this is awful. I don't want to learn any of this junk. Yeah, it looks like trash, right?" But then once you actually read the beginning of the book, they say, "Okay, this was not published by Nicolaides. He did not publish this book. We published it after his death. He was thinking about publishing it, but he didn't actually turn pro and actually publish it. So they had to pull together and search for all the work that was done when he was alive by his students and maybe kind of match what he was thinking about within there." Okay. So most of the work that's in there, in some instances, it really doesn't match perfectly with what he's describing, but it's good enough. I mean, in my instances. And if you're too deep into the technical, like I was years ago, you'll put that book down right away and just say, "No, this is junk," you know. But once you get deep into it, once you have that technical and a nice balance of the motive and of the emotional, I think that's where your art really, really will take off into a whole other hemisphere that I know I never thought about.
So I have one more question. So some of the exercises specifically in the natural way to draw have been incredibly surprising to me. And most of them have to do with the tactile. So feeling, not emotionally, but
Mhm.
physically, but not physically, if that makes sense. It's hard
Right.
to describe. How much do you think the tactile goes into the motive, or how much of your motive can be tactile feeling rather than emotional feeling?
Yeah, this is really a nice gray area. I'm glad you brought it up and it's hard to understand. It took me a while to understand, really. In a technical concern, think about some of the figure drawings that you love the most. There's going to
Hmm.
be a deep understanding of form. You can really tell that the side of the head goes back into space or comes forward. The figure has got a really good understanding of weight and volume. You can feel the roundness of the biceps or the chest of the leg or whatever. This is a lot of training and building that mental representation in your head of what it feels like to push an arm back in space. You're sculpting in your mind as you're drawing two-dimensionally, this kind of thing. And that's
Hmm.
more a technical concern, okay? Where the feeling can come in to a more emotional concern, right? Yet have parts of that technical form concern is when you're doing a gesture. And usually when I do gestures, I stand up. And Nicolaides has you do this. Some of the figure will be in some kind of twisting, uncomfortable position, right? And you get into that position yourself. You spend a few seconds and you're like, okay, what does that feel like, right? To twist in this weird way or put your hands in a certain way or whatever it's like. And then you try and express that twist. You try and express that uncomfortability, the tightness in your muscles, the slouching, kind of pain in my back, like this kind of thing. So then not only you have some kind of form involved, you're trying to twist your arm with a gesture, trying to pull it around. You're trying to say, oh, okay, well, I need a harder line here to make it feel like there's more weight up top. Yeah. And it gets into not, kind of a combination of the feeling and the emotional and the tactile sense, getting your own body involved, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That could be one of the faster ways to get a subject as a figure closer to mental ideas because you're going through the physical, right?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think when I was saying tactile, that's really what I was referring to though. Like, yes, the sculpting exercises are the really surprising ones. But when it comes to gesture, especially, I've noticed that even if I don't assume the pose completely, if I do one part of the pose that seems to be a real challenge for me, like, well, I'm having trouble representing this twist. So I'll actually do the twist myself. And once I can feel like what's getting activated, what feels sore on me, like what's stretching, it really becomes easier to communicate that on the page, even if I draw it basically the same way. If I actually hold the pose for a second or part of the pose for a second, that suddenly becomes easier to represent on the page.
Right.
It's interesting.
Well, one of the books that I love is Alla Prima by Richard Schmidt. And one of the things that he says in there, and this is pretty interesting, is he comes from a different side, a technical side, right? And he says, it's wonderful to, and I'm paraphrasing, it's wonderful to want to display the emotional, like the emotion of a crying child in a painting, but to get the head right so you can see what a person looks like when they're crying is technical. You have to be good at drawing. And that's similar here. But there's a difference between, it's kind of a change from what to why, or from why to why, in a different why. And let me see if I can explain this better. So in the beginning of the pose, why are you drawing it? Well, I want it to be technically proficient. I want it to look like that figure. I want to do a gesture and I want it to look like them and have, some kind of motion in it. That's one why. And then when you get your body involved, you think, why do I want to do that figure? I want to communicate how that feels, right? When you twist like that. So there's still the idea of proportion. I need to get that twist in there. I need to get that body in a certain position so it looks uncomfortable. But at the same time, I'm also trying to communicate the feeling of the figure, or at least the feeling that I impose upon that figure of uncomfortable, twist, ache, or maybe it's opposite of that. Maybe you're completely comfortable. Maybe it's like, wow, this person looks like they're boneless, How do I draw a boneless chicken? Kind of thing. How can this help you as an artist, implement, participate, practice? What can you do? The first thing is to change your how into why. Why are you doing this? Always ask that of yourself. Why do you make art? In a general sense, why are you making art, right? Answer that question for yourself. Why do I want to show up every day? And why do I want to sit at this drafting table? Why do I want to do tattoos on people every day? Why do I want to paint? Why? Always ask the why, okay? The how will be there. It's going to happen, but keep that why. It's like the how is the easy part of it. The why is the hard part of it. Why are you painting? Why are you drawing? Why are you sculpting the subject? Why do you want to communicate at all? Or what do you want to communicate at all? What are you passionate about? What are you emotional about? What moves you? How can you cultivate those emotions? Why and what? These kind of things. Ask that big why. That's a number one. Constantly ask why.
I like that. Simon Sinek applied this to business, actually, in a book called Start With Why. I think that's a good rule for any pursuit, really. So start with why. Figure out what it is that you're trying to communicate, and every decision that follows after you've figured that out is going to be very much aligned with that why.
Right. And you have to keep your why outside of the extrinsic concerns. Why do you make art? Because I want to make money. Well, we know that that's going to be pretty difficult. Be a business professional if you want to make money, this kind of thing. But if you're doing it just for the money, like Ayn Rand in The Fountainhead says, don't do it for the secondary consequences. Do it for the reason why you love it. And we've already talked about that. But try and keep it intrinsic. Why do you make art? Because this is what's going to keep you showing up every single day. Because you don't have control over if someone's going to pay for it or anything like that. Why do you make art? answering that question will keep you showing up every single day, even if no one pays for it, no one loves it, and eventually it just all goes in the trash. Having a really powerful why will keep you moving forward regardless of the outcomes. Why are you painting? Why are you drawing? Why are you sculpting?
That's another huge conversation we're going to have later. So, how to sell your art without selling your soul.
Exactly. Yeah, we got so much to talk about. I like what Socrates says, because this is all about knowing thyself. And Socrates says, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. I love that. Epictetus says, men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. And this is really, really important for me in my work and for art in general. Now, if you're listening to this podcast and you're driving, don't do this. But if you're next to a computer or later on or whatever, do an internet search for the greatest art that has ever changed history or whatever. And you're not going to find art that has tremendous technical concerns, right? It's barely representational. There's some representational stuff that's out there. But one of the first returns you'll see is Picasso's Guernica. He did this painting in response to a war that killed a bunch of civilians. He was outraged by it, and this was his feeling. And it's nothing but grays, abstraction, and it's one of the greatest paintings that has ever done. You look at one of the other ones is Andy Warhol's soup cans. You know, everything Andy Warhol has done, he's trying to make some kind of message about materialistic objects and how the public is all about materialism, you know, this kind of thing, you know. Some of the other things, ones that'll come up, it will be even some that you would think has technical concerns, but you know, are perfect marrying between those. You know, look at all of Monet's lily pads, or my favorite when I forget what chapel he was painting. He painted that same chapel, would sit there all day and watch the light go by and move from painting to painting as the light changed. He had like 10 different paintings of this chapel. But he was trying to capture the light. You know, this kind of motive behind things is, how can I communicate that light? And it was more than just technical. But the greatest paintings you ever see are going to be about emotional. Look at Andrew Wyeth, right? He painted in his, you know, everything around him, his emotional attachment to everything. Amazing compositions. But it's not I mean, he's amazingly technical, right? Almost super too realistic in some of his works, but most people are drawn to them not because of what they are, but why they exist and what they communicate.
I mean, even Van Gogh's Starry Night is one of the most widely reproduced paintings in history. And when you look at Starry Night, you're not thinking, oh, this is so representational.
Right.
This is how Van Gogh saw the night sky, or how Van Gogh felt the night sky, as something very whimsical and majestic and almost like pushing abstract. I mean, it's very much an abstraction. But when you look at Starry Night, you understand what it is, but you understand what he was feeling more than you see what he saw, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. An impression, right?
Yeah.
So this is the beginning of the Impressionists, right? So historically, I can chart this along with my own life. You know, I look at my life and it was all technical, and then all of a sudden I get an understanding of motive and communication and emotional, and there's a huge change. You know, here's before, here's after. You look at art history, technical, and then you get into the Impressionist. You know, maybe some time before then. And there's a huge shift. Before then, it was all about reproduction, copying, and then after the Impressionist, it's all about communicating just more than that. Communicating more than just, oh, this is a portrait, this is a landscape, this is a still life, this is figurative work.
So historically, what's really interesting about that transition, though, is that Impressionism was born as a rival to photography.
Yeah.
So once the demand for reproductions dried up, art had to say more. It had to. It wasn't just religious anymore. It wasn't just commissions for lords and ladies anymore. It had to become something more. That's really interesting. So yeah, photorealism.
And that has a really good connection with what we were saying earlier, where you have no control on the outcome.
Yeah.
So why are you making art? Why are you doing this? If it's for the external concerns of I want to make money, guess what? That can't happen. If you're doing it because you're getting a bunch of commissions and photography hasn't been invented yet, guess what? Photography comes in and you have to move forward, right? You have
Yeah.
to change. You have to look internally. You have to communicate more. Art became more at that point. At that point, it went well beyond what anybody would ever think. And you have to pull yourself away from the most of the public that would walk into, abstract expressionist kind of gallery, or look at a Pollock, this kind of thing. And, their concerns is, yeah, it's a big mess, right? on, but it's so much more than that, historically and emotionally, communication, this kind of thing. It's much more than that. But even I say that I'm making this black and white concern. Like there was a huge change at this point, and there was a massive change where most of the art market went from reproduction to into emotional. But then you can look at individuals such as Goya. If you want to see emotion in composition and a deep connection with society and communicate some horrors within society or emotion within society, look at Goya. Look at all his etchings. Absolutely amazing. If you want to learn composition technically, and if you want to learn how composition puts emotion into a piece of work, Goya's etchings is huge.
Yeah,
Very
that's
huge.
something we were discussing really recently, actually. So composition for storytelling. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's pretty interesting. I
Um,
mean, at some point you'll tell a story with your work, right? And it could be a complex composition where you have and when you first get into composition, most people are thinking this way. You have to point the viewer's eye to a certain place and compose it, and then you're controlling the viewer. And yeah, that's done in some instances, but it's kind of a dead way of thinking about composition, kind of lifeless. Okay, I'm going to control the viewer.
Here's the
Um,
golden ratio.
yeah, this kind of stuff. You're still trying to take a technical concern for something that should be emotional, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm much more interested in the power of composition to tell a story than to make it perfectly
Right.
aligned with the rule of thirds.
Yeah, and you got narrative. Okay, you're trying to tell a story within this painting, and that's interesting too. Yeah, even having a narrative in a painting can fall short in some instances when you're doing a portrait. So it's one individual central on the painting, right? And you're doing a portrait of an individual. How can you get a narrative in that? But what you can get is a motive, and you can get some emotion and communication about that individual. Look at Velasquez and all of his portraits of, I think it's Henry V or Henry VII. And you can see the change in this king throughout all of his different portraits, this kind of thing. Heck, most of his portraits that he did were of the destitute individuals, people that weren't looked at, in high society, this kind of thing. And he was trying to pull emotion out of. That's why Velasquez is huge in art. But this is what makes the art last, is the communication throughout the work, the motive throughout the work. And let's go back to what we were talking about before, where yes, and I know there's going to be I would love to have some person I could talk to on here that goes deep into the technical and is constantly challenging me on this, because it would be wonderful. If we could have some forum discussion on this.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of there, sort of.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But someone that says, no, what you're talking about, that communication crap, who cares? I just need to know how to draw, right? I can't do any of that junk if I don't know how to draw, a figure. Look at Watts Atelier, right? It's going to be all
there you
technical
go.
concerns
Technical.
throughout the whole thing.
Well, sort of. I mean, he does sprinkle in a lot of the art spirit through many of his lessons, but the lessons are pretty purely technical.
Yeah, they're all technical. I mean, because I'm going to agree with you. Yes, technical's there and
Yeah.
it's necessary. Okay, especially if you're going representational, right? You need it, but don't wait. Okay, don't sit there and think I have to be at this level as a draftsman to be able to make the art that I actually really want to make. And don't just do it for the technical. Be a master at what you have now. Now.
Yeah.
Work towards communicating with the skills that we have now. Regardless of how well you can draw or paint, you can still communicate something through your work beyond just the technical concerns of reproduction of what you're looking at right there. I've seen individuals that have no understanding of drawing, or like Van Gogh, always struggled consistently throughout all of his work just to draw a well-formed figure. The guy sucked at it, okay? But the last few years of his life and months is where he produced his best work, the work that has lasted now and throughout the entire human, generations, is his emotion, the way he saw everything. He didn't have technical proficiency. Actually, most master artists, most um, artists out there that have works that will last until eternity in human history don't have much technical concern. And then, one thing I dislike a lot is people, put this onto Picasso. Well, he started out, he was drawing figures really good, like he even needs that, right? Like, oh, well, we need to justify him, even though he did, 100,000 works within, or pieces of art within his lifetime, or was tens of thousands of works, and most of his works were amazing throughout. But we need to justify him by saying that he was able to draw figures in a technical, proficient way.
No.
Whatever,
Yeah. I mean, that's just another thing on the list, basically. I guess, though, that does bring up an interesting point that Picasso had style that he wasn't hiding behind a lack of technical ability. We could say that about the fact that he can draw figures.
Yeah, but as you and I know, okay, and I know this for a fact because there's been time in my life where I've gone several years without drawing anything. And that technical skill that you have for drawing a figure, it has left you.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
It's gone.
quickly.
You can probably get it back a little bit faster, but this is a thing that's like you have to constantly work with. Watts Atelier, Jeff Watts of Watts Atelier will constantly say, he's like, yeah, you're working on figures, you're working on portrait, working on landscape, you're working on still life. If you're trying to do all at once, they're all going to be mediocre, but then you focus on one and the other ones kind of drop down in skill, this kind of thing, because it's more complex. It's not like riding a freaking bike, right?
Not at all.
There's too much to it. Your brain can't handle it constantly. You can't just learn it, all of a sudden you know it, and you continue through it. So let's bring it back to Picasso. Yeah, when he started out, that's how everybody starts out. They learn the figure really well, and they know how to do this. But then he broke out of that, and he went deep into something that changed the world.
Yeah.
Lots of somethings, from cubism all the way into abstraction, and then just eventually making a bunch of lines in air and recording it and everything. He was doing some crazy stuff. The guy was amazing. A jerk, but he was amazing. We won't get into that. But my point is, don't wait for the technical concerns to come to be at a certain proficiency before you start communicating what you're feeling to individuals. Robert Henry says, and this is a long quote, there is an orchestration throughout the whole canvas. Nothing is for itself, but each thing partaking of the other is living its greatest possibility, is surpassing itself with vitality and meaning, and is part of the making of a great unity. So with the works of the great masters. Do not tell me that you as a student will first learn how to draw and then afterwards attend to all this. It is only through such motives that you can learn to draw. This kind of thought is drawing. The hand must obey the spirit. With motive, you will become clairvoyant of means, will seize and command them. Without motive, you will just wabble about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if
Here's the thing. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here because this is me communicating with emotion, because I'm so emotional about this, because it's so important. If you have motive first, if you have emotion first, if you have that burning desire first, that will lead to what materials you suggest you take, what surface you paint on or draw on. Everything else will flower from that, and it will develop the piece that you want. And you'll start asking questions that you would have never have thought of within whatever technical concerns that you have to deal with. Like when I was drawing Martin Luther King Jr., okay? Here's a guy, a poet that at 34 changed the world. I mean, hell, I'm 45, dude. He changed the world at 34 and was dead by then and had changed the freaking world. How do I communicate the emotion, the power, the steadfastness of an individual that lived through a torrent of racism, okay? How do I communicate steadfastness in charcoal and graphite on a white piece of paper? What does that line look like? What does a steadfast line look like? What does an emotional line look like? A powerful line look like? You know, these are questions that you start asking, and you know what? Your mind will expand so far beyond what you had ever thought. And then let's contrast it. Okay, so we have, and I'm looking at the drawings that I did for Phantom Fitness Works, and you have Martin Luther King Jr., and then I have Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, played by Johnny Depp, right? The guy's dirty, he's wacky, he's a bit crazy, he's probably drunk most of the time, okay? How do where's wacky, crazy, and drunk and charcoal? The first thing I do is I get messy with it. I
yeah.
get out a big chunk of charcoal, and I've got a black all over my hands. I'm standing up, I'm wobbling about just like he is. Yeah, and that's what you do it. Then I do Sheldon, right, from Big Bang Theory. He's totally a comic book. So now I'm thinking, how do I do Sheldon? I do him just like I would draw a comic book. So a hard edged line, lots of cross hashing, just like they do in comic books, which is beautiful work. I love comics. And then you do Mr. Rogers, right? I drew Mr. Rogers. Here's a guy, he's a freaking pastor, helps children. God, I love that guy. Probably one of the most wonderful persons that have ever been on the planet. But he's very traditional, right? So how do I do a portrait of a traditional person? I'm in graphite, and I'm settled down, and I'm drawing at my desk, and I have my tea, and I'm calm, and I'm getting all into the technical concerns for him.
That's awesome.
So, there's a whole broad range of emotion that within here, and it takes you further beyond than you would ever think in your artwork, because it isn't just about repetition. And another thing about this is it gets you away from this whole idea of skill, right? Because I need to, or I have a certain style. Sorry, not skill, style. It gets you out of this whole idea of style. Style is bullshit, okay? Style is a box that you've put yourself in because you're too afraid to jump outside of it in any way. Oh, this is my style, how many artists have we? I've been. I remember I've done I've done this, everything I say in here, I've screwed up. Just, I can't talk to anybody else. Well, it's not so good. Well, that's my style, you're afraid to kind of go beyond that. But when you get into these type of concerns where you're thinking about the motive first, and it's sending you into sculpture, into oil paint, to all kinds of materials, because the purpose is to communicate the message that you're trying to say, style is out the window, you know? The style is within the piece that I need right now so I can communicate the emotion that I want to communicate at this point in time. And then if you can't get to that, if you couldn't get to draw Mr. Rogers in a traditional way with a lot of technical concerns, that's when it's like, okay, I must communicate this, so I need to learn X, Y, and Z. Look at all of my art, starting with Phantom Fitness. I started with Superman, I went to Wonder Woman, and then combined through that. And you'll see right after I started with Superman, I drew him like 30 times or 40 times in Clark Kent and all these. It just was not working, was not working, was not working. But I needed to communicate these things. So, I'm sorry, Superman and the Wonder Woman, they suck. They're terrible. At that point, I thought they were wonderful, but if I look back, they suck. But I knew I was missing something, so I started learning. I was like, oh, I need to get into Steve Hewson's human figure, how to draw that, Natural Way to Draw by Nicolaides. You start pushing forward into other things, other concerns that will get you to move beyond just basic technical concerns. And I'm ranting now. Holy cow.
It's a good rant, though. It's a very good rant. I think if I were to distill it and try to synthesize what you just said, it would be, if you start with the motive, if you start with the why, everything else will take care of itself, including the technical skill, because once you understand how you plan to communicate what you want to communicate, you'll learn the techniques necessary if need be. But you still have to start with that spark, that glowing coal at the center of whatever idea you have, and let it expand from there. Is that about right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And you're right. The glowing coal, it's more like, a coal that's about to go out, right? It's so fragile. I'm always reminded of a quote in the movie The Gladiator, where Marcus Aurelius, the actor playing Marcus Aurelius, says something like, there once was a dream of Rome, and it was so fragile that if you just whisper it, it would fade away, And this is our motive at the beginning. This is our feeling, and we have to constantly nurture it through the piece, throughout our life as an artist. We have to nurture it, be careful with it, and keep blowing on that coal and turn it into kind of a fire, a deep fire. And that's through the artwork that we're doing. You have to keep that through, not only through from the beginning of your history as an artist, but through every piece. This is my motive for this piece. Let me keep that coal burning, that fire burning throughout. I'm going to end with this one thing. Art is life, okay? If you want if you're too deep into the technical concerns and you're not thinking about anything about communication, whatever, and you just want to make money, that kind of thing, that's okay. But I love this quote about Robert Henry, where he's talking about how it's important to live, not just be the artist, right? And he says, it is not desirable to devote all your time to an appreciation of art. Art should drive you forth. It should be an incentive to life. The greatest value of art to the appreciator is in that it stimulates the personal activity. And this is, and I look at Andrew Wyeth for this. He painted and drew everything around him. He didn't have to go to all kind of crazy countries to get something interesting, like Gauguin did. He drew what his life. He painted his life. So if you're deep into technical stuff, maybe get out a little bit more. Maybe have some fun, Be careful, but have some fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, life should be fuel for your art. And I think the reverse is true too. So art should be also fuel to live a bit.
Yeah, it has to have that.
It's
Probably
like
one of
creativity. It's the more you use it, the more you have. The
exactly.
same's true of I mean, art is a creative act. So yeah,
You got to have that love for it. Or I
yeah.
mean, because it's hard. It's not easy. If you don't have the love and the emotion for it, it's going to be harder and harder for you to keep moving forward with it. If you're only doing it for the secondary consequences or for the extrinsic concerns, you know, if that
You're
gets you up
missing
in the
out.
morning, that's fine, but it doesn't get me up in the morning.
Great conversation, sir. Great
Yeah,
conversation.
I'm sorry that was so long. I could go on forever and ever about it.
I am fine with that, and I'm you can you have a lot of passion for it, and I think that's sort of the point. I mean,
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
you have a passion for the topic because the topic is passion,
Right.
but not in the cheesy, oh, I'm passionate about this, I'm going to follow my passion way. Like, this is applicable passion or purpose or motive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It really is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to the listeners, and hopefully we can have a good impact with this.
I hope
I
so
think
too.
I think the motive behind this particular episode was to inject motive into more lives. Yeah.
Yeah. To get more emotionally involved, with
Like
it.
it, like I'm sure other artists out there, I am sure there are other artists out there who are like me on the topic of motive right now. Like, it's similar to the idea of flow. Like, I can tell that there have been sparks of motive in so many pieces of art that I've done, but holding on to that motive through every part of the artwork is where I think a lot of us are falling short.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't start with a motive, because every piece I do, I have some sort of feeling for it at the beginning. Like, there's an appreciation for the form at the very least. There is an attraction to the figure. There is something I like about what I draw, but once I start, it becomes technique.
Mm.
And I think that's where so many of us are letting ourselves down by the finished piece. I mean, we might be proud of it when it's done, but it could have been more.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, and it's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
It's the journey that we're in part of. It's never going to be perfect. I mean, there's lots of drawings and paintings I have up here that started that way, and then they kind of faded out, and it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. The next one, I'll stick to it.
I mean, I think your story of the Superman drawing describes it really well. Like, you started wanting to communicate this about Superman, Clark Kent. You went through so many drawings, but you didn't know what was missing until you found out what was missing.
Yeah,
And then your work changed. And I hope that this conversation alone can have that big of an impact for people listening. And this conversation meant a lot to me. So I'm excited to see where my work goes from here and where your work continues to go from here.
yeah. We, definitely don't have any connection with the secondary consequences. The external reward for this is zero for me. I just love talking about it. I mean, honestly, it could be a wall in front of me. I'd say the same stuff. So it's a win-win regardless.
uh,
If no one listens to this podcast, wonderful. Yeah, have a great time. I had a great time.
oh, I'm going to be shoving this one in front of people's faces as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go eat now. Thank you everyone for listening. Chris, thank you so much for ranting, as you put it. It was an awesome rant. I love it. Love it.
Thank you.
And until next time, everybody. Hey there. Thanks for watching the euCreativ Show. It's our mission to empower creatives to improve the world with imagination and good ideas. If you like the work we're trying to do, make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for updates when we upload new videos. If you think this video could help someone you know, make sure you share it with your friends. And if you want to stay up to date on everything we're doing, make sure you visit euCreativ.com and sign up for our newsletter. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and now go out and be creative.